there are times where I feel really guilty about things, but then you've got to remember, God is loving, God is forgiving, and as long as you ask for that forgiveness and you humble yourself, it all works out. So I'm Jake. I'm 29, and I'm a father of three. I'm an Orthodox Christian, and this is my testimony, I guess. I think before I became Christian, just way back at the start, I grew up in a secular family. So my grandma, my granddad, they were bombed, like baptized and everything like that, and but they never were practicing. So I don't think they ever held any belief. And then my mum, she kind of got into Christianity, but were really loose with it, not practicing, and it it kind of made things complicated for me growing up. So I was like, well, is there some validity to this or is there not? So I just kind of bypassed it. So I was like, well, it's obviously not important because there's no reverence with the people that are bringing me up and that I look up to. They don't care. So why should I? And I kind of wrote off God at an early age. I went to a Church of England primary school, and they had really loose kind of, your standard Noah's Ark and the nativity story and everything like that, but they never really touched on the deeper meaning behind everything, which kind of led me to lose even more interest. Because it's like, well, these people who are meant to be part of this church and a church school don't have any real interest in pushing the theology and informing us about why it's important and everything. So I kind of looked past it even more then. Going up to high school, getting into metal and stuff, bit of an outcast, and I kind of fell into this really cliche with like a lot of edgy like teenage metal music kind of stuff where it's like, oh yeah, Satan's cool and let's rebel against everything. And because religion's like a really main focal point in a lot of metal songs and stuff, you kind of get dragged into that whole like be opposed to it, and then that kind of solidified my stance of, oh well, you know this Jesus guy don't sound too great, and he don't want what's best for me. So I just kind of further and further, and then because I was separated from all faith, I kind of fell into like nihilism and existentialism, and I was like, well, nothing matters, so I might as well do whatever I want. And then that's when I got into drugs and drinking, and that were kind of perpetuated by being bullied in school as well. So I hit like a low point, and I was using drugs and drink to lift me out of that instead of finding a healthy coping mechanism. And from that point on, I became more and more aware of my emptiness, but I was trying to fill it with things that were constantly temporary, and it were always just quick fixes, and it were always, this is going to make me feel good for a couple of hours, and then right back down. And every time, you get lower and lower and lower, and it just, yeah, it didn't go well. I think there were signs of a belief, but still constant doubts. Always, usually when I were either really hungover or a come down, and I'd be there bargaining, thinking, I'm gonna die probably. I've taken too much this time. I'm having a bad time. Be laid there in bed praying like, if you're real, don't let me die, and I'll do whatever you want me to do if you just don't let me die. And then I'd be fine the next day. Obviously, you wake up in the morning and you're like, sick, I'm all right, and then you totally disregard that promise that you've made, and you're like, well, it's probably just a coincidence, and you just kind of write it off. And it was like that for years, probably up until like the last 3 or 4 years. And then that's when I was like, maybe there's something to it. I've made all these deals. I might have to back up my end at bargain and see if there's anything in it for me. But yeah, but it's a constant game of doubting and then having my faith kind of revitalized through different experiences and just perseverance as well, because it's not always as cut and dry as you start to question things and then you get sent aside. You've got to persevere, and it's hard sometimes, really hard, but it's worth it, because that hole that's there without God is filled with the presence of God. So maintaining faith is probably important, just to kind of fill that hole. And any doubts, you've got to kind of push them away. I'd say over the course of probably like a 5 or 6 year period, there were times where there were a lot of things, especially feelings and thoughts that I couldn't explain, that didn't seem rational to me, because I'd never had that kind of train of thought before, all these certain feelings, all this being drawn towards like any faith whatsoever. But it's like I'd start walking past churches and feel like a desire to, I felt pulled in. But again, it was one of those, never really thought much of it and just tried to push it to the back of my mind. So I was still in that whole rejection phase. And then it got to a point where, like, on Discord, me and boys had start theorizing about, what God was and what God meant. And we're like, oh, well, if the universe were created, what if, like, God was the Big Bang and this and that? Because God created everything in the Big Bang, and we tried to rationalize it in his mind and kind of come to this kind of like marrying scientific theory and like theology together without any real extensive knowledge on either. And it's just kind of playing with ideas. And then it was that point that kind of led me to kind of look in and lightly dabble with a few different faiths and kind of see what were going on. And in terms of like longevity, that's when like Christianity kind of reared its head as like consistency. And obviously you've got the Old Testament, the New Testament, and it's like read through as much as I can while trying to stay open-minded to everything else and the possibility of everything else. And then I started getting recommendations on my Instagram of all these reels and stuff, all these churches, and I'm like, okay, this is, I might have to look more into this. So I started looking into orthodoxy and reading a load of theology books, and I was like, this is it. And I started having moments where I'd be in the shower and I'd be kind of, where you're having your shower thoughts and you kind of sat there just thinking, oh, what's going on? And really deeply thinking on like Christian topics and on Christ, and just crying. And it was such a visceral, like, intense feeling that I'd never felt before, that I was like, this, I'm being spoken to here. I think it were a bit of a knee-jerk reaction to begin with, because it was kind of like, why am I feeling this? Am I going crazy? Because I'd been struggling with a lot of mental health issues at that point as well. But this were like totally separate, and this were like feelings that it wasn't like happiness or sadness, or it was something that I couldn't explain. And over time, it manifested into like an overwhelming joy, but also a lot of concern over my spiritual state. And I was kind of like, what am I doing with myself? Because it's like I were progressing through my life, but I wasn't really going anywhere, and nothing were going on, nothing were happening for me, and I wasn't pursuing these encounters and these feelings, and I was kind of just leaving it, just lying about and putting things to the back of my mind and focusing still more on myself and what I were doing rather than what I needed to be doing. And I thought, I need to take this leap and just jump 2 feet first into the faith and just see where it takes me. Oh, absolutely. There's a band called Holy Name, and they've got a song called "Meet Me Somewhere Quiet," and it's a beautiful song. It maintains that whole kind of metalcore vibe as well. It was marrying where I was coming from to where I was going together. So it's like all this, ooh, cool metal, um, and then with the faith, and it's like, you know, the music I listen to doesn't just have to be completely, opposed to everything that I like. And then I found all these, Christian metal bands and like metalcore bands and stuff. And I'm like, yeah, this is what I wanted. This is what I needed. Because I think that was kind of like a stumbling block for me at one point. Because I was like, I might have to stop listening to all the music that I like because it's a bit antithetical to all the where I want to go and what I want to be doing in my life. And it's like, I don't think I'll be able to because of the connection that I've got with music as well, and because music's such an important part of my life, letting go of that in place of something else was like a really difficult thing for me to grasp. And that's what was kind of stopping me in the beginning. And then I was like, well, there is best of both worlds where you can combine the faith and the music that you like into something really good, and most of it's a lot better than the stuff I were already listening to. So it's introduced me to a lot more stuff. But then Johnny Cash as well. He's got a song. I think it's a cover called "When the Man Comes Around," and that kind of gives like a brief telling of like the Book of Revelation, and that's really it hits. It hits. I can't listen to it without starting to weep like a baby. So suffering, lots and lots of suffering. The process of coming into the church kind of started with like church shopping and trying to figure out where there were an Orthodox church near me. Unfortunately, there isn't one like near, like, well, really close to where I live. So it's like I've got to get a couple of buses, and so that were kind of like, but I called up and I got a text message back from the priest, and I was like, I want to start coming. He's like, yeah, just come along, don't be scared. And I was terrified because I'd never been to like a full church service, never been to an Orthodox church service, and then I'd never been to a church service by myself either. So that was like a really like a big step to take, and I was terrified. And I'm there outside, and I'm like, if it's awful, you can just leave. You can go home. Everything's fine. And they're shaking, walking in, and I was expecting everybody to be, what you'd expect. Everybody's like kind of old and really stone faced, and they kind of look at you weird because I'm there with my face tattoos and stuff, and like a young guy. And I walk in, and there's a really wonderful greeter. Um, she's Greek. She came up and she's like, "Oh, hello. Is this your first time?" Give me a hug, and it was great. It was just such a pure moment, and I was like, "This is it." Um, so I stayed for the service because I arrived before the service. So I stayed for the entire service, and then afterwards I met the priest, and he talked to me, and he talked about, do you want to become a catechumen? And I'm like, absolutely. This is what I want. I've been reading up a lot, and this is where I've been led. And he was like, sure. So he took me on as a catechumen, and it was difficult because he gave me a lot of books to read, and I'd gone from like not reading too much to having stacks to read. So I'm there absolutely burning through these books, and then everything was going all right for a while. I was just getting used to, denying myself and all the worldly passions that I wanted to engage in. I was like, I have to, if I want this, I have to get rid of this. Um, and so that were a process. And then we got my baptism planned, but I were having a bit of difficulty at home, and I was battling a lot of issues myself. And when I went to discuss the plans for my baptism, I got told, "You're not ready." And I was like, "What do you mean I'm not ready? What do you mean? Do you know how much I've sacrificed?" Um, and then I left for like 4 months, um, and I had loads of doubts. I took all my icons down off the wall, and I stopped like praying. I stopped reading Bible, and there was this really, really strong presence throughout that entire time. That was like all the things that I used to engage in and felt guilt free. When I was engaged in them again, I felt really guilty, and I was like, "Oh, I didn't feel like this before. I thought all this would just go away, and it hasn't. It's overbearing, and it got to the point I was like, yeah, I might need to go back." And so I went back and I said, you were right. I wasn't ready, and I was too prideful and puffed up and too self-assured. And I was like, I am ready. I know what's best, and evidently I didn't. And then in that time, my fiance, she started going to church. On the back end of when I'd like apostatized and fallen away, she started going, and I was like, I didn't expect that. So I started going back to church, and we kind of got more into the regular rhythm where I'd go on Saturdays and she'd go on Sundays, and it was nice. And then her baptism started approaching, and we're like, well, maybe we should get baptized as a family. So she started coming to the church I were going to, and then we started bringing the children, and we were like, right, we need to get this done. So we talked to the priest, he okayed it, and then we eventually got baptized and chrismated, and that was where I thought, this is it now. This is the pinnacle, but it's not. It's just the beginning, and it's all leaps and bounds, because there's some days where it's really hard. There are some days where there's things that you really want to do, and you can't do those things. You can't do those things. Um, so you've got to try really hard. And there are days where you doubt everything, and you think, why am I doing this? And I think because of having such strong atheistic views growing up, those can creep back in, and that existentialism, that nihilism can come creeping back in and make you question, like, what are you doing? Look at you, you idiot. And it's all these doubtful voices, all this, the attacks, spiritual attacks, that tries to pull you away from the faith. And it's like, there are days where I don't feel like praying. There are days that I don't feel like doing anything that I should be doing. And when I give in and I just do whatever I want and think, I just need a day off, it's awful. I have a terrible time, and I don't enjoy the things that I used to enjoy that are contrary to my faith anymore. But I get these little trickery moments where it's like, go do this, it's fine, you don't have to pray tonight. And then wake up and it's like, oh, I feel awful, I should have prayed. So I have multiple favorite verses, but currently the one that I go back to the most, and that's part of my prayer rule every night, and my prayer rule with the children as well, it's Psalm 139, 13 to 17, and it's, for you formed my inward parts, you covered me in my mother's womb, I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvellously your works, and this my soul knows very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in secret and skillfully wrought in the lowest parts of the earth. Your eyes saw my substance being yet unformed, and in your book they all were written. The days fashioned for me, when as yet there were none of them. How precious also are your thoughts to me, O God, how great is the sum of them. And it's just that one section, especially after becoming a dad for the third time, it gives that connection between my children being born and the whole process. And like when Jordan were pregnant with both of them, it's like that that connection with them being formed in such a loving manner by God's hands, and Him knowing them before they were formed, and then going back to when I was born as well, knowing that that connection hasn't just been like when I found God, it's been constant from before I were even born, all the way up until now and on till like forever. And it just makes it more personal, because it kind of highlights the fact that God knows all of us individually better than anybody else knows us, better than we know ourselves, because we only know ourselves from living and from his lives and from his experiences, whereas in God knows us from before all of creation. And it's just it's reassuring, and it's really warming. I'd say just don't give up ever, just because no matter how bad things may currently be, no matter how bad things may be in the future, you're not alone in that, and Christ is always going to be by your side throughout all of it, even though you might not, necessarily feel his presence. He's there, and he cares. And it's like he says in Matthew 24:13, but he who endures till the end shall be saved. And it's like everything that you go through in life, as significant as it seems now, in the grand scheme of things, enduring through all of it becomes worth it, and all of that becomes insignificant upon the day of judgment. And when you come to the heavenly kingdom, it's it's all worth it. Um, yeah. If I could speak to myself like 10 years ago, I'd probably I'd give myself a good shake and tell me to sort my head out. Um, but to just stop being so skeptical about the existence of God and that relationship, and it's not going to change anything, because life has got significantly better. Like my outlook on life has got better, and even though I still have the same issues, the same struggles, the fact that I know that I'm not alone through any of that helps so much, that it lifts that weight off my shoulders. And to accept that relationship a lot sooner would avoid so many like problems and so much heartbreak and hurt and so much unnecessary baggage that got brought forward, that it just stop being stubborn and just say yes to the relationship between yourself and Christ. I'm a waffler. Like everybody at church says, like when we're at coffee hour, we'll start talking about something, and then they'll be like, Jake, and I'm just like, hey. Well, and then they're just like, don't get him started because he doesn't shut up. Don't ask him any questions. Don't speak to him. If you want a quick, concise answer, just don't talk to him.